Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, or evening, or wherever you end up being. This is the TRC Podcast. I am your, I don't want to say host, a moderator, if you will, Alex, and I'm joined by a colorful cast of characters who will be kind of helping us run the ship for the foreseeable future here. I have Adam.
Hi. So I have been a member of, well, not anymore, but I used to be a racing reference commenter going back to probably 2005 or so. And then that's where I met Sean, who will be chiming in here and there. And then I ended up meeting you guys through there. So I've been doing this for, almost 20 years. And I look forward to contributing to this podcast.
Fantastic. Well, it's good to have you. I'm just going to go alphabetically here. So we have Anemic Royalty. If you want to say a little bit about yourself and how you kind of got into this little cohort here.
Yes, my name is Jake. I'm in my mid-20s. I've been watching NASCAR, I guess you could say since 2001, but my first live race I remember watching was the 2003 Bud Shootout. So I guess you could say 2003 was my very first season. I was a racing reference commenter starting in 2013, and I kind of posted semi-regularly there until we formed our own little forum in late 2016, which then became the Discord server we now use since mid 2019. I co-run that, or I'm co-administrator with Ryan.
Yo.
And we, yes, hey Ryan. And so we mostly post there every day. This podcast is just kind of an offshoot of that. Everyone here is a member of the Discord server. We will have some guests here that won't be here as regulars, but me, Ryan, and a couple of the other guys you'll hear here will be our core. So I guess there's really not much more to say on my end. So thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, well, Ryan, you already kind of chimed in a little bit here, so I guess we'll just make our way over to you. Kind of introduce yourself, talk about your start into this little community here.
So I've like they said, we all met each other on Racing Reference. I joined there summer 2015, then went along to the ended up being the TRC Discord, and I've been a NASCAR fan since 2007. The 2007 Daytona 500 was what got me first hooked on it. I was a big Dale Earnhardt Jr. fan, now Chase Elliott fan, and I am mostly here to specialize in advanced statistics. That was Sean, who Adam mentioned, was the inspiration for all that, and made me kind of want to start my own statistics that I borrow from NASCAR's loop data. So I'll talk about that a lot more throughout our show.
Terrific. Well, and then our last member of the team here, the guy behind the boards, if you will, is Merb, also known as Alex. For clarification's sake, I guess we're calling him Merb here, but if you want to go ahead and, give us your introduction.
There's so many Alexes. It's kind of mind-boggling.
It's an epidemic.
So I've been watching NASCAR since 1998, when I was probably like 4 years old, and I've continued watching it pretty much ever since. And like everybody else, I joined the Racing Reference comments boards in, I guess it was 2011. I was aware of the site before that, like before I started commenting. Probably I would say 2008 or 9 is when I found the site. And then, but yeah, I started commenting in 2011, and then, as everybody else kind of talked about, the community has just sort of naturally evolved to this point now. And so here we are, and now we're doing a podcast, and it's quite interesting, and it's going to be fun, and I'm excited.
I'm excited too. I guess I'll give a quick introduction for myself last. I joined the Racing Reference comments in 2013. I'd followed NASCAR since about like 2007, 2008, give or take. Really started becoming a hardcore fan in 2009, trying to watch as many races as I could. And then, yeah, found Racing Reference, didn't realize for a while they had comments, then kind of stumbled into that community. I posted under the name The Long Shot. And then, yeah, I mean, just I'm repeating what everyone else is saying. Around 2016, I kind of had the idea to create a splinter group, a forum for kind of this group of people who I felt like really fostered a lot of good discussions. And so we went to there for a couple of years as an online forum, and then it switched to a Discord server, which is where we're at now. And as I'm sure we'll kind of touch on a little bit more, it was the conversations that we'd been having in the Discord server that kind of inspired this podcast. All these kind of like spontaneous little um, jumps into racing history, talking about current events, things like that, and how the conversations could go back and forth in so many different ways. Um, it all felt so natural that in a way I feel like podcasting was kind of the logical way to go. And so I'm glad we did it. And I'm glad we're all sitting here recording this. I do want to kind of touch on a little bit, and I think Ryan and Adam can speak to this a little bit better than I can. So this podcast is going to be a little bit different than your general kind of um, BSing, talking about whatever happened in the race type of thing. We are going to talk about it, but there is going to be a little bit of a twist that you don't find in the majority of NASCAR podcasts out there. We're going to be incorporating analytics into the discussion a little bit, not just the statistics and metrics that NASCAR and maybe some other major sites are using, but analytics that are created by some of us. And again, that's why I single out Ryan and Adam. So I'm wondering if maybe Ryan, if you want to take the lead on this one, kind of talk about your analytics system a little bit, and then kind of where its inspiration stemmed from. I know you mentioned Sean Rona, who's he has kind of made his mark as well as a NASCAR analytics statistics guy. So kind of talk about how your idea spawned from his and how it's kind of blossomed into its own thing over the years.
Yeah. So for me, I've always been fascinated with, and we have a lot of conversations about this type of thing. Who was really the best driver in a certain season, that kind of thing, or really just ranking drivers across their whole careers. Who's better. And with NASCAR's playoff system, obviously being, maybe not the fairest system in the world for determining a champion, I think it's really just been an interest of mine to kind of try to boil down performance, not just results, but performance to, quantifiable numbers. So in summer of 2020, I think it was during the break that NASCAR had during the lockdown. We were really kind of lost for things to talk about, and we were doing more analytical type discussions around that point, and it just suddenly occurred to me, I should try making my own metrics. So it started out with just something very simple. It was related to pass differential, and then I started incorporating average running position into it, and then it just grew and grew from there, and now it's this whole complex system. I call it ETDR, stands for equipment-based true driver rating, which is similar to the statistics that NASCAR has for driver rating, except it incorporates equipment into it, about the best that I can do to quantify that. Also, luck, which when I say luck, it's basically just the amount of positions. I calculate the amount of positions that a driver loses or gains under caution that they don't control. Um, so it's a very complex system, but in the end, it boils down to one number that's really a performance rating for each driver, and I make those statistics for every race and then average them out over the course of each season.
Cool. Um, I think, and we'll definitely get more into the meat of um, how these rating systems and analytics kind of manifest themselves as we talk about individual races more, which we'll get to in a bit. Um, I do want to talk about what Adam does. I know, Adam, you have some other kind of things that you calculate.
Yeah.
And I guess, yeah, if you wanted to touch a little bit on what you do on the analytical side of things and what you'll be bringing.
Yeah. So just to give a little bit of a past history, I started watching NASCAR in the mid 90s. And even as a kid, I kind of recognized that finishes don't really tell the story of a race and that often the finishing order kind of lies. That people sometimes run better than they finish, sometimes they run worse than they finish. And so I started playing around with various point systems even when I was in middle school, like trying to just find a better way to measure drivers than the classic Latford system or average finish, because that's pretty much all we had back then. And and especially compared to other sports, because I mean, football, basketball, baseball, maybe not so much hockey, but they all had far more robust statistics than NASCAR did. And that kind of gave me the inspiration to start trying to make my own and trying to fill that statistical void. And so that's kind of what I've been doing over the years, is just experimenting with various things to reach that goal. Well, it's not really an end goal, it's just an ongoing process. Um, and I think it started out for me is measuring leading rather than finishing. And this is something Sean and I collaborated on, God, probably back in 2003, 2004, is measuring the percentage of each race that a driver led, given that some races are 500 laps, some races are 160 laps, and that just straight laps led doesn't really tell the whole story. So we started playing around with that, and then over the years, things have gotten increasingly more and more complex. And then with the advent of NASCAR's loop data in 2005, there's been a whole new world of things to play with, as Ryan has been doing, and I've been doing a lot of the same things. So, and then also like Ryan, during the 2020 lockdown, I was bored out of my mind, so I started charting old races from before the loop data era to estimate drivers' running position during those races, because I felt like it would be a good comparison to know, for example, like how well was Bobby Labonte actually running during his 2000 championship compared to just his finishes. And by using video charting, I've been able to estimate that to a pretty accurate degree. Um, and then more recently, I've piggybacked again off Sean's idea of measuring green flag lead changes, and he calls these natural passes. We've kind of adapted to call them on track lead changes, but an on track lead change is essentially any pass that happens on the track during the natural flow of a race. So, not under caution, not during green flag pit stops, not when somebody blows up or crashes, but an actual lead change. And when you measure that over a course of a season, it really tells you which drivers are good and which ones are not. And that's the kind of analysis that you just are not going to find in any kind of mainstream site. So that's something that we're going to be talking about a fair amount. And yeah, I hope all of you will appreciate the statistics that Ryan and I and Sean and others have been working on, because I think it'll add a lot to your knowledge about NASCAR.
I want to talk a little bit more. I want to focus on loop data because the both of you mentioned it, and I know no one here, maybe Sean does. I'm not exactly. I don't think anybody here has much experience with having tried to collect statistics before the days of loop data, so pre 2005 Daytona 500, I believe, was the first race that had loop data.
Was.
Yes.
Was. Yes.
And I need to just make it clear real quick. My statistics only go back that far. I pretty much entirely rely on loop data for what I do. So I definitely appreciate what Adam and Sean and everybody do for trying to find stuff before that, but that's just a bit too much for me.
Yeah, well, and you anticipated my question too, because I was just going to ask, like, how big of a difference does loop data make, not even just for your statistics, but for um, NASCAR analytics in general? I mean, it seems like it kind of opens up a whole new world as far as like different things you can chart, um, just different things you can measure. So yeah, I
It really
assume it's very
does.
important.
It really does. I mean, for you can watch all the races and make your own observations, but you can't have like an objective metric that tells you exactly how somebody ran or how many passes they made before loop data. So it really exposes a lot of different things that you wouldn't have known otherwise.
Yeah, to follow that, I would say that specifically the most important loop data stats are average running position and passing statistics, as in number of passes made, number of times passed, quality passes,
That's
which is
differential.
passes made in the top 15. Um, and also the number of fastest laps, which is the number of times that a driver was the fastest lap or the fastest car in a given lap, which I think tells us a lot. And it's kind of a nice compliment to laps led. So, somebody can be running back in the pack because they lost their track position, but be setting blistering lap times, and that will show up in the loop data. Now I will say there's some parts of the loop data that are a little bit misleading or frankly just not very important. I think driver rating, for example, which is sort of the flagship metric that loop data creates, I think it's overly complicated and it doesn't always tell the right story. So it's better than nothing, but I that's why I applaud Ryan and others for trying to improve on it because it just
That is
doesn't capture. Yeah, go
that
ahead.
is really my main goal with this because I think driver rating. I mean, it's great in some ways, which I mean it is their version of really one number that kind of combines everything and tries to really drew out this exact type of performance metric. But I mean, my biggest issue with it, first of all, is it doesn't reward dominance enough. It's capped at 150 is the maximum score, and I am not a fan of that at all. I think most dominant performances should be rewarded a lot more than that. I also think if somebody has just a really terrible bad race, there should be no limit to how bad the score should come out there either. So my system, it's three different components of it: the running running position component, the passing component, and the equipment component. Which it's all just a bunch of numbers kind of blended in there, and then they come out to a certain percentage of the total score, which can be anywhere from. I mean, theoretically, there's no limits on it at all, but I would say a very high score for ETDR would be 300, and a very low score would be in the negatives. So there's a lot more flexibility there, and what that all does is I try to look at ETDR as not really something that's definitive of each individual race, but it all averages out, and I think it really, at the end of the day, rewards the most dominant drivers who have the highest highs in a season. It punishes guys who just they run 15th every week without really doing anything better than that, just kind of points racing their way through the season.
Yeah, you both already touched on driver rating, which is good. I was going to ask about that. The other thing I'll ask about, and then we can kind of get, I think, into this weekend's races a little bit. Um, I want to kind of get ahead of this question because I think anyone listening to this podcast is going to bring in the obvious person, which is David Smith and his peer rating, which, just in case anyone doesn't know, stands for production and equal equipment rating. It's kind of his version of a performance rating. I kind of wanted to get both your thoughts and anyone else who wants to chime in, Jake or Merb. Basically, what you think David does well and what you think your statistics take into account that his don't, if that makes sense.
Okay, well, I'll start. I would say that sort of paradoxically with David is that his lesser known statistics are actually very revealing. For example, he charts the number of positions gained and lost on restarts from both the preferred groove and the non-preferred groove. And when you look at that over the course of the season, it really can tell you which drivers are good at restarts and which are not. Like historically, for example, Kurt Busch has been the best double file restarter for really the entire time we've had double file restarts. And that's something that you wouldn't have ever known unless somebody took the time to quantify it. So I think it's really cool that David took the time to do something like that. And he also charts things like the number of positions gained and lost through pit stop cycles, which he attributes to the crew chief. And you could argue if it's the driver and crew chief and whoever strategist is involved, but that's also another thing that, again, you'd never know unless somebody was actively making an objective measurement of it. But as far as his peer statistic, I mean, how do I say this diplomatically? I don't think it's very good. I think that, first of all, it's based entirely on finishes. So the way a driver runs during the race means nothing. He can dominate the first 95% of the race, and if he gets a flat tire right at the end, Pierre will say he had a terrible race, and that's frankly ridiculous. And also the way he calculates equipment strength, which is the way that his numbers are handicapped by the equipment the driver's running in. He uses the speed of the car to tell us how good the equipment is. And the obvious problem with that is that the driver influences the speed of the car. So, for example, he said that like he'll say that one SHR car, for example, is far worse than Harvick's car was, say, in 2018. And it's like, well, yeah, but that's in part because Harvick's a better driver than the other teammates. So it's kind of circular logic, and it doesn't really pass the smell test when you look at the numbers. So I respect what David has done over the years, and I don't want to disparage his work, but Pierre just doesn't get it done. So over to you, Ryan.
Yeah, I definitely want to jump in and explain my own way of quantifying equipment strength, which is, I mean, it's not perfect, and I'm not going to pretend any of my metrics are perfect. I don't think anybody else will, but best way to do it for me is combine each car on a team, kind of combine them so that their equipment strength is skewed towards the average running position of the best car on the team. So, for instance, a three-car team, suppose their drivers ran sixth, seventh, and eighth in a race for average running position. Uh, equipment strength would be 6 times 3 plus 7 times 2 plus 8, and then divided by 6, since that's the sum of all those numbers being divided. You don't really need to, if that sounds too complicated to you, it doesn't, it's not that important, but just what it boils down to is, in my opinion, generally, as a general rule, uh, explains equipment strength pretty well. Uh, Occasionally, you'll have a team that looks worse than the equipment is, especially if it's like a single car team. And if a driver runs 10th, a single car team, you don't know if that's first place equipment or if it's 30th place equipment. It just depends on the driver is, but I think it all averages out pretty well, though. What might happen sometimes is a race where a driver on a single car team really punches above their weight, then will be penalized in that particular race because the equipment looks better than it is, but then it'll be evened out by all the races where they run worse than their equipment probably is, and look better in that from in the final TDR calculation than they should be. So, once again, no metric is perfect, and I don't think any of us claim that any of our metrics are perfect. But there's, I think what we can say pretty sufficiently is that it comes out to rate performance better than any NASCAR point system would, or any traditional statistic like average finish would. So that's really the goal with all this stuff.
Terrific. Okay, well, thank you both for explaining that. Again, like I was saying before, this is stuff that's going to come up organically in discussions. So this is kind of the necessary kind of opening part where we need to kind of explain, like, everybody's sort of mission statement, what they're trying to accomplish with their statistics, and kind of the general information about each one. So so now that we've got a good picture of that, I kind of think we can just jump straight into talking about this weekend's race, unless anyone else has something to add before we go there.
Actually, I'll just say one more quick thing, and that's in terms of analytics. I want to make it clear that the numbers are just a tool to help us understand what happened during the race and which drivers are good and which are not, but they're not the be all end all. I mean, you have to watch the races, you have to understand the context of what's happening, and I will never rely on my numbers as if they're the gospel, because they're not. They're just a help. Like for example, right now, this year, Cole Custer looks very bad in all of our metrics, and a lot of that's just because he's had terrible luck, and it's impacted his passing numbers, it's impacted his average running position. Really, it looks like he's been terrible, but he's just had an anvil fall on his head over and over and over. And that's something you wouldn't know just by looking at the numbers, but we do know from watching the races every week. So please keep that in mind, that our metrics are not everything.
Awesome. Thank you for clarifying that. That's an important point. So I think
Can I chime in just real quick?
for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'll just say I sometimes post my own statistics on the server as well, but it's obviously nowhere near as deep as what these guys do. I definitely don't view it in as kind of a maybe. I don't want to say these guys are not, they're not cerebral in the way they view it. I know they get emotional like me, and this is just their way of kind of trying to quantify it. But you could say, I guess I view it in a little bit less objective light than the others do. I get pretty worked up over this stuff in an emotional way sometimes, but I do enjoy the occasional discussion of my own analytics that I'll post. I came up, I think, with it's pinned on the server. This lead change project comparing all the races on intermediate tracks from the last 7 years, kind of to debunk this whole 750 package was better than anything else myth that there was. And I think I pretty much did accomplish that. And I also did, we talk about other sports as well on the server. I did this college basketball project, which was kind of like, it was half a ripoff of something I'd already heard, read before in an old article years ago, but I kind of tried to make it into my own thing. And it was sort of like, you could say, my version of driver rating for NASCAR, but a team rating, just to try to get everything down to one number as much as possible, using different statistics that are proven to be the most relevant towards teams winning a championship. And I kind of tried to use that when it comes to NASCAR drivers as well. But I'm not going to claim to be in the same league as any of these other guys because, again, I'm probably a bit more susceptible to emotionality. And I'm definitely prone to cherry picking. I will not hesitate sometimes to, post a statistic that is in my emotional favor, but I try to be as fair as I can be most of the time when I'm not just completely, um, you know, off the Richter scale when it comes to that. So that's just kind of my own, I guess you could say, doctrine on it.
Yeah, well, it's one thing I think to be fair-minded, kind of what you're saying, but it's also, but yeah, definitely to expect objectivity from anybody is, you know, a pretty ridiculous and impossible ask, and kind of segues into what I was going to do next, which is I wanted to go around the horn here and kind of ask people who their um, who their favorite drivers are, because I know, for as statistically oriented as we are, we all have our favorites, we all have our rooting interests. And the only thing I'll say is that I'm going to go last, and you're going to see why when we start talking about the race. So, right. Yeah, Adam, do you want to go first?
Yeah. I mean, now I'm probably one of the few people here who doesn't have a favorite driver. I've found over the years that I enjoy the races more if I'm not obsessively focused on one or two guys, and I can kind of just watch the race play out from like a bird's eye view rather than a tunnel vision view. So now there are some drivers I like more than others, but overall, I don't have a favorite driver. So, um, frankly, though, sometimes I wish I did. Sometimes I think that could actually make it more fun to be more emotionally invested and more worked up, like some of you guys get, but I just don't have one. So, yeah.
Um, like I said earlier, I was a big Dale Jr. fan from the time I first started watching until he retired. And that was first. I mean, it was just because my dad met him at one point and said he was a really cool guy to talk to, and I went with that, and eventually figured out he is a really cool guy. He's got a great personality, really a man of the people who anybody can relate to, and it was fun to root for a guy who maybe he wasn't hugely successful, but he was successful enough that he could win, and everybody kind of wanted him to get that championship eventually, which unfortunately never happened. And then once he retired, I started really rooting for Chase Elliott and Kyle Larson just because they were the young up and comers at the time. And for a while, I was like, all right, I'm not really going to have one favorite now. I'm just going to kind of have a bunch of guys who I like. But then 2020 happened, and Larson gets suspended for the whole year, basically the whole year. That kind of made me like, all right, well, Chase is my guy now. And then he has so much. Right when they came back from the pandemic, just has so much bad luck when he's running up front every week, and it's like it just made me solidify that he's my guy. And now Larson came back, and I can't root for him anymore because he's Chase's teammate and he's beating him. So, um, well, so anyway, I think for me, it's definitely important to have kind of that one guy who you really get behind and get emotionally invested. And even if it's not always healthy, it just keeps me feeling like I care more than I would otherwise.
I'm gonna chime in here after Ryan because Ryan and I are actually gonna start a spin-off podcast of this, and it's gonna be called Custer Island because I think we're like the last two people on Earth that believe in Cole Custer and like aren't calling him a bust at the moment. Because Adam mentioned Custer, that made me think of that. But anyway, as far as I
Still the
go,
youngest driver in the field, isn't he?
I not anymore, but up until
Oh no,
this year.
Justin Haley's younger.
Now I think it's like
And Todd
Haley
Gilliland,
and I think like
Harrison Burton. I think all the rookies
Cindric.
actually.
Yeah, all those guys are younger than him. But anyway, I'm a believer in
He's
Custer.
like 22.
He's not my favorite driver, but he's like up there. I like him a lot. As far as I go for favorite drivers, I kind of just have like a pool of people, um, and mainly it's at the moment like I love Tyler Reddick. The past year or so, like I've fallen in love with Tyler Reddick. I think this dude is awesome. Like his personality, the way he drives on track, like the Bristol dirt race, the end of that, and the way he handled himself after that situation, I thought was just like, honestly, if I had to choose like one favorite driver now, it would probably be him, and that was the moment that like he skyrocketed to that for me. Um, but as far as others, like I love Alex Bowman, um, Ryan Blaney, Bubba Wallace. Yeah, Daniel Suarez. I kind of just have like a pool of people, and I've kind of always been that way. When I was younger, I liked Jeff Burton and Ward Burton. Um, I always really liked Dale Jr., but I was never, for fear of like placing myself within that fan base, which admittedly could get a little crazy at times. I tried not to like identify as like a wholehearted Junior fan, which I think is kind of understandable. But I have nothing but respect for that guy. I think he's awesome. Um, anyway, I guess that's where I fall on the favorite drivers thing. I don't really have one particular one, I guess, but I wanted to say that about Custer and subscribe to the Custer Island podcast that me and Ryan are starting.
All right. Jake, yeah, what do you have as far as favorites go?
Yeah, I was a fairly big Dale Jr. fan from the time that I guess from the time I started watching until he retired. I originally it was because um, my dad and really my whole family were Earnhardt Senior fans, and I just liked him because they liked him, and he was his son, and I wanted him to do well. But as time went on, um, kind of like Ryan did, I came to find out that he was just a really awesome guy. He's maybe the only guy out of all the contenders, I guess you could say contending drivers of his generation, that both had a great personality, but also wasn't a jackass. Um, he was just a really colorful personality, really entertaining, just a riot to listen to. But at the same time, he wasn't a jerk about it, which that is an incredibly rare quality when you get to the top levels of sports. Um, and one of my biggest regrets as a sports fan, somebody that's watched many sports um, for 20 years now, is not appreciating what happened during his comeback enough. Because I remember it, we all know what happened around 2009 and 2010 and what a period that was. It was just such a hellish time to be a Junior fan. I mean, we heard it, from everybody. He heard it from everybody. You couldn't get away from it. People just wanted to take pot shots at him in every way you could. And if you were a fan of his, you had to hear it. And it was just miserable. And even when he started to kind of make a comeback around 2011, 2012, it was still going a period of time where he was struggling to get wins. And that made it uh, even more difficult until he finally started getting those wins. Like the 2014 Daytona 500 was probably the most satisfying win that I had as a sports fan in the entire decade, because we'd just been through so much to get there. Um, and it's not often that I have a sporting event that affects me so much as to it really makes me feel good in my personal life for more than a few hours or even a day. But I remember specifically that week just glowing. That whole week after it happened. Um, and so naturally, I enjoyed the rest of the success he had there, but at the same time, I kind of took it for granted. And that really made what happened to him in 2016, 2017 really hurt, because, I kind of just assumed that it would keep on happening, that it would just continue. But unfortunately, life has a way of showing you that that's not the case. And his last season, it was very painful. You guys, I was on the forum that you guys were with, and you could testify to kind of how miserable I was, and how miserable I made everyone else. But you know. But I was a big fan of his throughout that whole time. Didn't really have a driver that I would say came really close to him, even though there were others that I obviously liked. Since he retired, I don't really have anyone that I'm just a diehard fan of. I don't. There never will be. I think not only just another race car driver, but just another sports figure in general that I will feel in the way that I felt for him. But uh, I would say my favorites, the closest thing I guess you could say to that now for me is Corey LaJoy. Um, I don't know if he's ever going to get a decent ride or be able to make uh, what he should out of his potential. And so I guess you could say of the contending drivers, like my de facto favorites are Alex Bowman and Kyle Larson. But at the same time, if they win, times when they win, I'm not going to be just jumping off of tables and flipping stuff and screaming or any of that. It's just, I like to see them do well, and I'm happy when they do well, but it's not going to, make me feel like I'm, just ecstatic. I guess you could also say I kind of like Cody Ware for the laughs. And I also kind of like Ross Chastain. He's not quite in that tier. I guess you could say Bowman and Larson for me, but he just kind of reminds me of like the good aspects of Dale Earnhardt Sr. And it's just of someone who came from a family that really loved Earnhardt. It's kind of just hard to shake that from my DNA. And there's a few others that I don't mind seeing winning, but I would say that's my hierarchy.
I think I'll step in here really quick just to say, I think or if there's one driver that like everybody on this server kind of likes, even if he's not our favorite, that would probably be Bowman. I think we all just appreciate how. I mean, first he came from this kind of small time background where he had to drive in really bad cars for a while, and then replaces Dale Jr. Now it's like just how much he pisses people off by not even doing anything. It's like this guy's just an agent of chaos. There's like no rhyme or reason at all to
Yeah, the
when he contends
quintessential.
for wins, or it's great. I
Yeah,
can't not appreciate that.
yeah, the quintessential Bowman moment was like last year at Martinsville when he came up near the end, and I think first he got into Hamlin, I think by accident, and he literally, to avoid any trouble, gave Hamlin the lead back. Didn't have to. Most drivers wouldn't have, but he just gave it back to him. Then he came back to his rear bumper, raced him clean for 20 laps, and then he finally, I guess, kind of got into the corner too deep and accidentally took him out. He didn't mean to do it, but it just happened. And he won the race like that. And Denny Hamlin threw a hissy fit and tried to ruin his celebration. I'll never forget whoever that fan was that I don't normally endorse stuff like this, but I'm just going to say it. Whoever threw that fully loaded water bottle on top of Hamlin's car right now, whoever that is, you are a legend. You're a legend. You're a goat. Uh, you should be praised. But anyways, and Bowman, you could tell that he apologized profusely. Even though he didn't do anything wrong in his interview for winning, and he did barely even celebrate it because you could tell he felt bad about what happened. And like he was trying to explain that it wasn't on purpose. But Denny being Denny, he's not going to take that. But to me, that just shows the kind of guy that Bowman is, and that really was the defining race of his life and his career to me.
Guess
Yeah.
this is probably where I should say any race where something bad happens to Denny Hamlin is a good race. I guess my disdain for him goes back to 2017 when he took Chase out at Martinsville. But then these past few years, he has consistently come out in my metrics as just being very lucky, benefiting from gaining spots on pit road, from strategy calls. In 2020, when he won 7 races or whatever, and people were talking about him and Harvick as the two guys to beat, there was nothing more satisfying than seeing Chase, who had a much better season performance-wise than Hamlin all year, end up taking them both. And winning that title. And so, I'm going to be a little bit biased at times. I think we all are. We all have drivers we don't like. I mean, let's admit it. But and
Mhm.
we're going to try to be as fair as we can. I mean, I'll say Hamlin this year has been exceptionally unlucky. Not that I'm shedding any tears over that, but I'm going to be fair to him. He's had a better season than wherever he's running in points with 22nd, 23rd. Uh, so but I guess now turn it over to Alex and kind of continue with that theme because I
Get
know
ready for this segue.
yeah.
This is going to be amazing.
Well, I mean, I'll start by saying I think across the board with the members of this podcast, there is no love lost for Denny Hamlin, and I think we will find that out more as the episodes go on. But we'll set that aside for now. There'll be time for that. I think with me, I think my favorites are kind of like twofold. I really enjoy rooting for people who are just incredibly likable. So I'll jump on Alex Bowman. I'll jump on Tyler Reddick. I'll add Chase Briscoe to that. I think Briscoe. Um, I mean, he's always seemed like a decent guy, but I think especially with what he and his wife Marissa went through with the two miscarriages and all that, just the incredible heartbreak that he went to, and how he's kind of managed to keep a good face on through all of that has been remarkable. And yeah, it
And
just seems like
he's also very active on social media in a positive way. Like he reaches out
yes,
to fans like in a
yes,
very,
Reddit
very
and
close
everything
way.
for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. And yeah, like I said, I mean, the move he pulled on Reddick was kind of, I mean, it was a dumb move, it was stupidly aggressive, but, came up, apologized right afterwards. I thought it was just about the manliest thing he could have done. And yeah, and other guys like, Bubba Wallace, for example, I think is an incredibly likable guy. Um, so, and then I'm also I get very excited by just watching raw talent at work. Um, so when I think of raw talent, I think like watching Brian Blaney come through the ranks. Watching Chastain now, the things that he's doing with a fast car are beyond incredible. Um, I'm gonna throw, as far as older guys go, Kyle Busch, obviously. I don't think he's ever been a favorite, but I mean, just watching what the guy can do with a car is incredible. And Kevin Harvick, I think you'll find that I play devil's advocate for Harvick more than probably a lot of people do in here, because I think the guy is one of the most amazing stock car talents I've ever seen. Um, so it's just, yeah, watching him is remarkable. And then yeah, and the same goes, I mean, even in the lower series, because I enjoy watching the lower series. I like watching the prospects come up, and we'll talk some about prospects in this podcast as well. But for example, Ty Gibbs, another guy who I play devil's advocate for because thoroughly just I'm just completely entranced by his talent, and just watching what the guy can do in a race car. Um, is remarkable. There's other people too, like Carson Hocevar, one person. I don't think Merv mentioned him, but
I
unless I
forgot.
don't remember.
I'm a massive Hocevar fan as well, but
Yeah, we're
I
gonna
was
be.
just trying to stick to cup drivers, but
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, we're gonna be. Yeah, we'll be hyping Hocevar whenever we talk about truck stuff, I'm sure. But yeah, him, and then even like, not that she's an amazing talent, but Haley Deegan, for example, I think you talk about unlucky seasons. I think she has had a very unlucky season, even though statistically it looks like it's one of the worst seasons of all time. But again, we'll get to that. Um, but we'll jump off the Ty Gibbs thing because the guy who was my favorite when I started out,
Yeah,
um,
who is your
first,
favorite?
who is my
Does
favorite?
it happen to be the guy that pissed a lot of people off yesterday at the time we're
Well,
recording this?
it is. It is. Yeah. So yeah, Joey Logano, he was my favorite when I started watching racing because he was the hot prospect. He was the exciting guy to come out and watch. And um it was exciting to see someone that young come up, some guy who was literally, less than 10 years older than I was. and watching him go through the ranks and watching him piss people off. I mean, I didn't like that he pissed people off, but it made me feel more defensive of him. So, like, the more hatred Logano got, the more defensive I became of him. So that I don't know, 2014, 15, 16 period was I was a very defensive guy back in those days. So but yeah, I don't know if Logano's explicitly my favorite now, but he's always going to have a special place in my heart because of the memories that are attached to him.